Well, Tom and Paul and Lisa, Stephen Miller is one of his chief domestic advisors said, yeah, they want to buy Greenland. They want to control Greenland somehow. And if they want to do that, at least the most famous precedent would indicate they need Congress's permission in a vote to authorize using U.S. dollars to do that.
Is that a Louisiana purchase?
It is a Louisiana purchase, and we're going to buy a major territory. Now, a lot of people don't know the scope of Louisiana Purchase, how much land that was, and why it was so important, to go west and sort of opening that entire gateway and really solidifying, I think, U.S. expansion. So it's really going to have to be a justification when, again, people are worried about things at home. The president seems to be focusing, with some exceptions, on matters abroad.
Wendy, should we be surprised that Congress is giving the president a fair amount of leeway here on these international efforts in Venezuela, maybe Greenland, maybe some other areas? Should Congress be taking a larger role here?
Well, on Venezuela, the president of the United States can take military action without talking to Congress, without telling Congress, for some limited period of time. And the technicalities of the War Powers Act is really boots on the ground, troops that are going to be there. You have about 45 days, then you have to ask permission again for 45 days. Then you need an authorization of military force like we had in Iraq. That's the rule. That's the law. The president seems to find ways of exercising presidential power without following the law. But right now, he is within the bounds of presidential power in Venezuela. Greenland's totally different, and you're seeing Republican senators jump, really get out there very quickly and say, we're not buying Greenland. What are we doing? We don't need Greenland. This doesn't seem to be what we should be focusing on. So you've got some prominent Republican voices in the Senate saying, no, we're not going to approve this. So I don't know how he moves money from the Treasury somehow to buy Greenland without that support, but it's a bigger matter. Republicans don't love to get involved in these conflicts without any end game, except, of course, Iraq under George W. Bush. So going into an election year, how do you tell your constituents this is what we should be doing? And Trump hasn't given them a really clear explanation they can use with their constituents.
So politically, how does this play in an election year for the Republicans and the Democrats here with President Trump, like many presidents do here at this stage of their, in a second term, focusing on international efforts? How does this play domestically, do you think, politically?
Well, Republicans have argued for limited government. They supported DOGE. They supported cutting government. It's, spending can go awry, as we saw in Minnesota. Things, if they're not watched, we can lose a lot of money to inefficiency and corruption. That's a winning message with most voters. But how does that improve voters' lives right now? And the Democrats have the task, without being in power, of saying, if you give us power, we will make your life better on these dimensions. And Republicans now are sort of saddled with explaining how they can control the entire federal government and not make things better for people. Right. And going into Greenland and Venezuela doesn't really show voters there. So both parties face some challenges. They're kind of inverse of each other.
Wendy Schiller with us with Brown University. Can't say enough about her academic effort. A new treatise out on inequality across states in America at Cambridge. We're celebrating that as well. Paul, in the old days, you and I studied the Louisiana Purchase, before a Duke basketball game. Sure. We read like 6 pages in the Cliff Notes.
Yep.
David Rubenstein now at the archives, you go in, you can see the actual photo images of the 7-page document. You can click and get a transcription. So here's where we're heading, Professor Schiller. I'm making this up, folks. Treaty between the United States of America and the Kingdom of Denmark. The President of the United States of America and the First Consul of the Kingdom of Denmark and the name of the Danish people, designed to remove all sorts of misunderstanding relative to the pursuit of happiness and all the rest of it. Wendy, are we heading towards, almost a Versailles Hall of Mirrors document signing with Denmark?
Well, again, we know this from history. Presidents need the Senate to approve treaties. That's the rule. That's in the Constitution. You can't really get around that. So he could sign a document and they could have some ceremony, but it wouldn't have any standing unless the Senate approves the treaty. And we know that Senates have rejected treaties in the past. Ask Jimmy Carter on SALT II. So you can get rejected. And certainly, I think this is the thing that the Republicans want to avoid. The Republicans in Congress now are running from behind to keep control of the House and maybe even the Senate. and they need something to help them get back into the game. Having to attend a signing ceremony on purchasing Greenland is not going to get the Republicans back in the game to hold power in 2026.
I mean, Paul, this is the Detroit Lions blue button. Excuse me, Paul. This is a huge deal. The Senate, we don't know, as Professor Schiller just said. It's up for grabs.
It is. So again, the news is coming fast and furious. Wendy, we had this ICE Minneapolis shooting, kind of raising questions just about ICE in general and how ICE interacts with citizens and non-citizens. Is this a political liability for the president, or does this in fact play up to kind of what his base is looking for?
Well, I mean, his core base supports him really no matter what he does. And remember, he's not actually running for anything in November. But we've seen with George Floyd in Minneapolis in particular also how this event could catalyze and organize what have been resistance movements across the country to ICE and the placement of the National Guard in major cities. And that could really bring it all together under the umbrella of overreach and overstepping power. We know that the vast majority of Americans, or the vast majority, 63% or so, disapprove of ICE tactics. So this is not going to help that number with Republicans, and independents are in that mix, as are Republican voters. So you have to ask yourself, if you're Congress, do you want to defend these measures consistently? The real power Trump has now still over the Republicans in Congress is the primaries. He can swoop in and shift a primary. At least we saw that in the fall. If he can still do that, they have to stay loyal to him because they don't want him to come into their backyard and get them a primary challenge that they can't win.